right, it is 12 o'clock on the dot. And so we are going to kick off. We're talking about unlocking your leadership potential today. Thank you very much for joining us, all of you. For those of you that haven't actually kind of met me and really know who I am, my name is Cliff Morgan. I'm a leadership expert and organizational psychologist. And I have a background in the military. And when I transitioned into civilian life, I went and studied psychology and became an endorsed organizational psychologist. So I take psychology and I apply it in the world of work. And I work with leaders to help them get the most out of their people and their people to get the most out of work in their lives. So I'm pretty lucky. I have my personal mission in life, my personal passion is helping to leaders and their teams to pursue their potential and perform at their peak. And I've been lucky enough to build a business around this. And for the last 6 years, I've been consulting and really focusing on that leadership development piece and helping leaders step into their potential and help equipping them to empower their people to do exactly the same. So really today, what I'm keen to do in this session is to help you identify some of the things that might be holding you back and really allow you to push forward so that you can pursue what is possible on your leadership journey. So what can you expect? Well, unfortunately, there is no magic pill for this particular topic. There's no magic formula that you can apply and it's going to miraculously manifest your fullest potential overnight. But there is a process that you can follow to do that. There are some specific steps that you can take in order to speed up that process as well. And towards the end, what I want to share with you is a specific step that not many people do, but if you do, it has the potential to really accelerate your progress to stepping into that next level. And so I want to share that with you. And there's also a special offer for all of you who are joining us online today, which is great. So it is going to be an engaging webinar. I do want to use the chat. I want to hear some of the things that are popping for you, what's resonating for you. And if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat as well. I will be monitoring and I will answer those questions as we go. Be aware there will be time for questions at the end as well. You might want to save your question there. And I'm also a psychologist. I like the interaction. I like the feedback. So if I say something that really resonates or something that pops for you, then let's use the emojis. Give me a thumbs up or a hand clap. And I like seeing those sorts of things on there. So let's jump into it. What I want to know for you first is what are some of your long-term leadership goals? And when you think about this, I want you to think about if you were to step into your fullest leadership potential sometime in the future, what would that look like for you? Put that in the chat. And while you're typing, let me share mine. I mentioned that I have a company, Lumion Consulting, and my long-term leadership goal and my potential as a leader, I see, is really around building that company so that there's a solid core team that is helping leaders pursue their potential and perform at their peak. Right? That's our mission statement, to really help leaders become luminaries within their organizations and their industries. And, what I'm keen to do is also have this business be a pipeline of a development pipeline for young psychologists as well. That's what stepping into my fullest leadership potential looks like. What is it for you? Put it in the chat. I'm really keen to hear, because unless you can clearly articulate what your fullest potential looks like, you can't be intentional about developing a plan to get there and executing on that plan and doing what you need to step into it. So clearly articulating it is one of the first steps to unlocking that potential. So Anushka, you've put here, I'd love to be leading a team that is fulfilled, passionate, and kicking goals. Yes. So it's really for you, not necessarily what you're doing, but the team experience is around that fulfillment and passion. Absolutely Love it. Alan, you're saying leading a large corporation, right? Okay, so we're talking about the size of the endeavor. There is there for you. So keen to hear what Richard, Angela, Yanesh, Adam. What are some of those things for you? Throw it in the chat. I'm really keen to hear. In 2019, I made the decision to run a marathon. I wasn't really a runner. I had done some running in my time in the military, but really I had not often run past 10 kilometers. But I made the decision, yes, I'm going to run a marathon. So there's a series of ovals right near where I lived, and it's affectionately called the Flats for us locals. And if I was to run right around the outside of those ovals, it would be exactly 1 kilometer. So a great place to train and run laps. Now, the first time I went down to the Flats to run laps and as part of my training for the marathon, I encountered a group of, I'll call them elder statesmen of the running fraternity in our local area. They were all in their 50s and they were quite experienced runners. But they came down every Tuesday morning and they were running intervals and laps around that. They invited me to come and join them. Now, these guys had 20 years on me, most of them. But I tell you what, that first session, I could not keep up. I almost threw up and I didn't finish the session and I left and I was doubting myself. I was asking myself all of these questions. Could I actually do this? Can I actually run a marathon? Do I have it in me to actually go through with what I said I was going to do? And I was filled with all this doubt. And the reality is that when I think about it, every time I've taken a step forward, something that I had the potential to do in my leadership sphere, I've encountered that same doubt, that same questioning of my own ability. And what does that look like? You ask yourself, could I actually, is the question that often comes to mind, is like, could I actually lead a patrol? The first time I had a room full of commanding officers and senior military leaders, could I actually add value to them? The first time I was coaching a CEO of a large corporation, it's like, could I actually do this and do this well? And this doubt always comes. And so it's a bit like this, right? And this is why it happens. If this is where we are right here, but this is where we want to go, well, there's a whole kind of big gap here. And we're uncertain as to what that gap actually is. What is it between here and here? What does it take to get from here to here? We're uncertain about the process, the progress, how we actually do it, and whether or not we can actually do it. And let me tell you this, uncertainty, it opens the door to fear. See, people fear what they do not know. And when there's a whole lot of uncertainty, there's a whole lot of unknowns. Unknown, how do I do this? Whether I can do this? What's going to happen if I try and do this? What happens if I fail? There's a whole lot of unknowns there that opens the door to fear. And fear is really debilitating, right? And so that's one of the first things that we're going to encounter whenever we try and pursue our potential. We need to understand we are always going to encounter uncertainty and fear, and that we need to expect that. And really, that is one of the things that holds people back from pursuing their potential and unlocking and achieving all that is possible within them. I'm a scientist, right? I'm trained as a psychologist, and as psychologists, we're trained as scientists who study people. And so a lot of our stuff has to be done on research, and because that's rigorous. And so in preparation for this webinar, I've done some very rigorous research. I conducted a LinkedIn poll, and I asked the question, what stops you from holding back, from fulfilling your potential? And here are the results, right? We can see here, we've got fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt. That was the top score. Over not knowing what to do, not over lack of opportunity, over lack of time and resource. And what you'll notice is that fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt doubled any of the other responses. It is the biggest thing that holds people back from achieving their potential. And, when we think about what are we actually afraid of, there's so much. Some of the core ones, some of the most common ones were fear of failure, the fear of being criticized, fear of conflict, fear of not being good enough. And these are some of the most common. And when we stop and we think about it, it's actually really important to understand what is it we are afraid of. It's a big principle that underpins all the work that I do is unless you can clearly articulate it, you can't be intentional about actioning it. So unless you can clearly articulate what you are afraid of, then you can't be intentional about developing a plan to deal with it and doing what you need to overcome it. And so, there's this cliche that's often thrown around, name it to tame it. And it sounds, as I said, cliche, it sounds kind of glib, but all the research in psychology, in the academic literature, it says that actually naming what you're afraid of, naming the fear, actually gives you control over it. It empowers you. You're like, okay, cool. This is what I'm afraid of. Now I know what that is. I can figure out a way to actually get around it. So I want to ask you the question, what is it that you're afraid of? I want you to put in the chat, what's holding you back from stepping into your potential or taking that next step or leap into what is possible in your world? What's the fear? Can you name the fear? I want you to put it in the chat. All right. So, okay, Anushka's got definitely not being good enough. You know what? I think that not being good enough, am I good enough question? I've been doing some thinking and some writing about that, Anushka, and I reckon it's a question that every single leader encounters. And you need to be able to answer it, because if you don't, it's just going to it's going to erode over time the foundations of your influence and your self-belief and everything that kind of lays the foundation for your leadership. So definitely that is probably one of the number one fears that I encounter when I'm working with leaders. What about some of you others online? Can you name the fear? And, even if you don't put it in the chat, I want you to write it down. And there's a reason that I do that is once you write it down, you're actually making the intangible tangible. And if something is tangible and practical, you can actually do something about that, right? There's a psychological process that happens in your brain when you take what is ethereal in your thought world and actually commit it to paper and make it physical. And so that is a really powerful process. Write it down so you know what you need to deal with it. All right, so we've got Adam. Adam is not having the charisma required to be a great leader. Excellent. Okay. Angela is saying imposter syndrome. Alan's saying fear of conflict, right? So all of these things are 100% legitimate. They are not things that we want to encounter, but often they are the things that we need to overcome. They're the things that are holding us back. And Richard's saying risk associated with going out on a limb. Yeah, there's definitely, I know stepping out and starting your own business is a massive risk, or whether it's going out on a limb within an organization. The risks that are associated, again, it's the uncertainty as to whether or not that risk will manifest into a real concern that is really what might be driving some of that fear there, Alan. I love Carl Jung is a famous psychologist, and he says, where your fear is, there your task lies. I absolutely love that quote. Is rather than run away from what's holding you back, let's actually lean in. And that's what ended up happening when I was running. And rather than say, okay, cool, I can't run with these guys, I'm afraid of being shown up by a bunch of old men when I'm the young guy, all that sort of stuff. Rather than run away from that, I actually leant in and I went back week after week after week until I could actually finish the sets. I could actually run with them, and I was able to continue my training with that. All right, which is really important. So The next kind of point that I want to make is the what if. Is how do we overcome this fear? How do we deal with it once we've identified it? And really, I want to talk to you about the power of what if, because what happens so often is that we start asking what if, right? The fear manifests, and the risk is there, and we start going, what if this happens? What if this conflict materializes and the team breaks down, and we completely fail the project? What if I'm not good enough to be able to relate to younger people, as Eric's put in there? What if I just can't translate those values that are there, and understand them and appreciate them? I was talking just this morning with there's an executive team in conflict that I'm working with, and talking to one of the guys there, and literally he's saying, like, what if we are uncompatible for business? What if our differences are unreconcilable? And so often humans have this negative bias. We have this, we focus on the negative, and that's inbuilt. And we can talk about how that is a safety mechanism. It helps us identify threat so that we can respond and stay safe. And that's all well and good, but the reality is it doesn't always help us grow. It doesn't always help us achieve our potential. And so the reality is that if we do just go with what happens naturally to most of us, and stick and dwell on the what if from a negative perspective, what if all the bad things happen? What if all the catastrophe, like the worst case scenario, rolls out? It becomes this downward spiral, and we end up running away or not stepping into our potential at all. We are held back. But the what if phrase, the what if question, is actually really powerful. And we can use that same question, that same phrase, and say, well, let's be intentional about this and not let it hold me back, but I want to propel me forward. And you can say, well, what if the best case scenario happens? What if I learn to fly instead of falling? What if I'm able to turn this project around? What if I can actually relate to these people in a different way that increases my influence and actually develops their capability, and all of a sudden they're better than I am, right? What if? That question so often can hold us back, but it also can propel us forward if we're intentional about that thought life. And if you ever if you're ever caught in that, what I call the thought tornado, it's like you're just going around and you're ruminating in these negative thoughts, going, yeah, but this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and what if this happens? Really, what I encourage people to do is stop. Write down what if in the middle of your page, and on one side you write the worst case scenario and all the things that you're thinking about. But then on the other side, think about what is possible here. What if the best case scenario happens? What if everything turns out way better than I could ever think, dream, or imagine? And actually write that down. Again, you're taking the intangible, you're making it tangible. It's something for you to focus on. And in doing that, it becomes a motivating, right? You get the dopamine, the endorphins, the oxytocin, serotonin, all those things going on in your head because you're thinking about possibility rather than problems. You're thinking about the potential solutions and things you've got to do in order to achieve your potential, rather than focusing on and reinforcing those chains, those bars, those brick walls that are being built up to hold you back. And so the power of what if, use it. Don't let it block you, let it propel you. And I really want you to encourage that. Does that make sense to people? Is that resonating? If it is, give me a thumbs up, put it in the chat, give me emoji. I want to know if that helps. So good, Anushka is saying, which is awesome to hear. And, one of the things that we've got to do as we start stepping into, yes, a quote by Gandhi, which I absolutely love. Um, if I have the belief that I can do it, I shall surely acquire the capacity to do it, even if I may not have that capacity at the beginning. And really, the what if question, what it's doing is, as you focus on possibility, as you focus on potential, as you focus on what could go right, and kind of start making that tangible, what would it actually look like? What it does is it builds this self-belief. The more tangible that positive outcome is, the more that you actually believe that you can actually do it. And that becomes really important. That self-belief is so important. If you do not have the capacity at the beginning, that doesn't mean you don't have the potential to in the future, but you have to build the belief in order to take the step forward to build the capacity and therefore achieve what is coming ahead. Okay. So the next step that we've really got to focus on is breaking it down. So as we were sort of saying before, the gap here is so big, all right? So often we might be running a small company, but if we want to lead a large organization, there's a massive gap there. For me, as I was running, as I said, in terms of the marathon, I wasn't running beyond 10Ks. But the step up to 42.2 Ks is a really big step. And if we focus on the end without, and the distance from where we are now to where we need to go, that can seem really overwhelming. And we need to kind of break that down. See, what happens if we don't is we get so overwhelmed that ultimately, whoa, disregard. I was jumping forward ahead. It becomes really overwhelming. Okay. So in terms of my marathon, I had to break it down, right? There's the physical component, there was the mental component, and then there was like the knowledge that I needed to have and the inspiration that I needed to have to build the self-belief. From the physical component, it was, I had the training piece, I had the recovery piece, and I had the nutrition piece that I had to be really intentional about so that I could back up day after day to do the training that I needed to and actually start running the distances. See, what happens if we don't do that, as I said, is we get overwhelmed. So we need to make a plan so we can clearly articulate what are the steps we need to take. We need to break it down and make it smaller chunks that are more digestible that we can actually deal with. So, that was kind of my running. It was like the physical, the mental, the knowledge piece that I had to go. And once I did that, I was like, okay, now I know I've got this particular training regime. I've got this particular food. Okay, I need to get this particular knowledge around how do I go from A to B in both the mental and the physical realms. But I broke it down into small chunks, and then I go, okay, cool. I can find out that piece of information. All right, I can turn up next Tuesday. And all those sorts of things. And when we start talking about leadership, we need to do the same thing as well. Because today's all about our leadership potential. It's not our running potential, but I'm just using that metaphor. When we talk to leadership, we need to break that down as well. Because when we say, hey, I want to lead a large organization, awesome, that's brilliant, but what does that consist of? You can't just go from, running a small company to stepping into leading a large corporation. You've got to break that down. You've got to focus your efforts in your development. So from a leadership perspective, right, I've just picked 5 random ones here that are pretty important for most circumstances today. We've got the relationships piece and building relationships, building rapport, building the trust piece, right? That is so important from a leadership perspective because, really the relationship and the trust it lays the foundation for influence. Leadership is influence, and therefore we need to lay that foundation. So relationships is a key one. Communication and clear communication. 100% important when it comes to leadership. Management skills, all right? People talk about leadership versus management. I mean, from my perspective, leadership is all kind of creating and instigating change, but that can only happen if it's got the stability that is given by management, right? Leadership needs management, and managers need leaders. So it's a very much a left and right hand component there. So do we need management skills in order to improve our leadership? The strategic thinking piece, where are we going? What do we need to do in order to get there? Is that where we need to focus and develop? Or is it the business acumen, the commercials of the business? In the leadership world, everything's got to stack up these days. So, these are just some of those areas that when we start breaking down our leadership potential, where are we going to focus? We've got to do this part first, right? So my question is to you guys, like, where do you need to focus? What elements of leadership, if you break leadership down, do you need to get better at, develop, and focus on in order to go and achieve those goals that you put in the chat earlier? All right, I want you to put that into the chat. Where do you need to focus? Is it relationships? Is it your ability to communicate? Is it your ability to kind of manage and, do resources? Is it the strategic thinking and decision-making? Where is it? So Alan's saying strategic communications. Yeah, so it's the communication piece, but doing that really strategically. How do you do that in a way that brings everybody on the journey? Great. Anushka saying such a good question. Not sure. And 100%, this is one of the things that, again, gets people held back or holds people back, is that they haven't taken the time to really think about what's the next step, like where do I need to focus? And if I break it all down, rather than just thinking better leader and kind of doing all these general things, one of the things that I say is that more specific you are, the more meaningful you become. If you ask general questions, you're going to get general answers. And if you have general pursuits, then you're going to get general results. But if you're able to break it down and be more specific, then you can focus energy, effort, time, and you are going to get more meaningful results or more meaningful reflection, more meaningful return on investment for your energy. So I do encourage you, Anushka, is to go away, sit and think and journal after this. Where is it that you need to break it down, and where is it that you need to kind of focus your efforts? All right. So as we keep moving on, right, what else do we need to do? We need to focus on just the beyond. And let me tell you what I'm talking about here. So if we're looking here, right, and we've got the board here. So just think about this as a specific area of potential, right? And so this here, this might be kind of where we're sitting down here, right? This here is our known area of capability. This is what we can do. We know we can do this. We might have done it before. We might have, we've achieved it before. We know we can do it. We know what we need to. We've watched other people do it. We know that this is where our known area of capability is, right? Now, where we want to get to is up here. It's well beyond our known area of capability. But what we need to do is we need to focus down here at the just beyond, because if we focus up here and we just go for it, there's three things that are going to happen. All right. The first thing you do, we're going to give up. Then we might break up, and ultimately that will make us lock up. And I say this because if we're focusing right up here at the top, okay, the gap is too big. The effort to go from where we are to where we want to go, it's so big that we give up. We end up demotivated because we can't achieve it, and we're not going to achieve our milestones. And so we give up, or potentially we break up. And when I was running the marathon, I thought I'm going to go start running 20 Ks, and it was far too big a leap from where I was currently. So I was focusing far too much in the distance from where I currently was, my known level of capability. And what ended up happening was that I actually broke I injured my knee, and I had to take time off running. And, from a leadership perspective, the same thing can happen, in that if we are trying to do too much too quickly, what happens is we end up breaking. Either that's we burn out and, we become overwhelmed with the workload, all that sort of thing. Or you might be the team. If we're pushing our teams too hard, then what happens is they actually break up because under the pressure. And eventually, if any of those two happens, what happens is we become so dejected that we lock up our dreams and we say, well, we can't do that anymore. And we kind of throw away the key and we never actually realize our potential. And so unless we break things down, unless we start focusing on the just beyond, right, which is here, then we're going to give up, we're going to break up, we're going to lock up. Okay. But if we break up here, this is just beyond our known level of capability. We can actually see what we need to do. We know what we need to do to get there. And so what I would do, the recommended training regime for running a marathon is that you increase by 3 kilometers every time you do a long run. Now, 3 kilometers is a little bit different than, jumping an extra 10Ks on top of what you were doing. And every time I would get to my turnaround point, I would be able to look down and I'll go, okay, so there's the next turnaround point. I can see what I need to do. I can see the distance that I need to travel. And I believe that I can do that. And I know what I need to do. And so essentially what would happen, right, is you run and then you achieve that. So what happens is your known level of capability now increases. So the next week, I would set the new goal in the just beyond, and I'd run and I'd achieve that. And here's what happens. My known level of capability increases. Okay. And then the next week, again, it's the just beyond. And so over time, what eventually happens, all right, is this. Our known level of capability increases. And you can see we're getting closer and closer and closer to that level of achievement. Our achievement increases over time because we are incrementally making the steps forward, the progress forward. It's something that we can believe that we can do. We're confident we can do it. It helps us overcome. We know what we need to do. So therefore we don't fear the just beyond, right? And so there's less certainty around getting and achieving the just beyond. So the same is exactly, relevant, I guess, in the corporate world. If this is your let's say we're talking about whatever area of potential from a leadership perspective, if it's relationships, right? What's the just beyond? What's the one conversation that you need to have to improve the relationship? Or what's the question that you need to ask? If it's coaching skills that is really kind of what you're trying to develop, well, what's the question that you need to ask, or what's the coaching conversation that you need to be involved in order to develop that capability? If it's decision making, what's the decision, or what's the decision framework that might help you? What's the one thing that's going to progress your level of capability in that potential? All right, in just beyond. And these are the questions that you need to ask. You break it down and it makes it so much more easier. It makes it so much more doable, right? Achievable, possible for us. And so these are the things that we need to do. And over time, as you pursue, you're going to eventually get to where you need to be, right? And that sort of thing. So let me know if that's resonating with you. Does that make sense to people? A lot of people, like, just using this as a visualization, a lot of people are like, right, that makes so much sense. I realize, I was aiming up here when really I just need to break it down a little bit more and do the just beyond. I can do that. All right. And when we're talking about imposter syndrome and conquering our fears in the workplace and all of that, it's about focusing not on up here, but focusing on the just beyond. Okay. And so often that is really helpful. The big thing here that I just want to talk about also is kind of comparing ourselves to others, because so often we can be on our journey and the progress is gradual, the progress is slow, but we're looking left and right to the people that are around us, and we actually see them, they might be much more further. Or we're looking at, the best leaders that we want to emulate, and they are so far ahead of where we are. And what the thing that I'll say is that look to others for inspiration, but not for validation, right? You run your own race, run your own journey, be inspired by the things that other people have done or the achievements that other people have conquered and made, but don't let that determine your value, the value of your journey. All right. Look to others for inspiration, not validation, becomes really important. And over time, you're going to get there. Here's the thing, though. Sometimes things don't always go to plan. All right. This is me when I finished my marathon. So I did actually achieve it. I ran the marathon. However, I had a goal to run it under 4 hours. Now, what actually happened was the marathon, it got delayed 9 weeks because of COVID. And so instead of running at the end of winter, I was actually running at the beginning of summer. And it was a really hot day. It was a really windy day. Conditions were not favorable. And, I think there was about 24 people that got taken to hospital because they collapsed on the track that day. So I finished the marathon, but I didn't make 4 hours, 18 minutes. It was my time. So, there was this sense that I didn't actually achieve my potential. But the reality is I shifted my frame of reference for what was hard, which was really the whole reason for running the marathon. And I had achieved so much in the process of running that marathon. Just be aware things don't always go to plan, but that doesn't invalidate the journey that you go on, right? You always end up better. You always end up with a greater level of potential at the end, even if you don't hit your goals. And that's something, is a perspective that becomes really important because there's so much that happens outside of our control. There's so much, whether it's other people determining our promotion. We don't determine whether or not we get promoted. We can put ourselves in the right position, but ultimately the decision is somebody else's. We can do everything right from a cultural perspective, but if the market forces mean that nobody wants to buy our product anymore and the business collapses, that's not necessarily within our control. So sometimes things don't go to plan, but pursuing your potential is always worth it, and you always become better because of it. All right. Cool. So Angela's saying a linear transition to improve your capability with a complex organization can often be affected by the ambitions of others. Exactly right. 100%, Angela. And so, I'll talk about a bunch of different things down the track as well. What happens when you get to your limit? In theory, you could keep increasing by 3 kilometers indefinitely, Eric's saying, but in reality, everybody can only run so far. Yeah. So let me answer that this way, Eric, in that I believe that your potential is asymptotic. And so if you kind of look at something this way, an asymptote, all right, is something where it always keeps increasing by small margins, but never actually arrives at an end. So from if you were to draw it out on a formula and a line and a graph, this is kind of what it would look like. These two ends in an asymptotic scenario would never actually, they would continue to get closer and closer and closer to the axis, but they would never actually touch. And your potential is the same way. You think about for me, I can continually do a little bit more, a little bit more. Now, you look at kind of the marathon piece, and you've got Eliud Kipchoge, who's now run the marathon under 2 hours. Now, he would tell you that there's a little bit more in the tank. I could do a little bit more. I'm getting really close. Now, his level of improvement is only going to be by a matter of seconds, right? Versus, my level of improvement, the first time I ran a 20 Ks in a half marathon race was, I think, around 2 hours and 5 minutes or something like that. And then by the time I was running the marathon, I was running my first 20 Ks in about 1 hour 50 minutes, right? There's a significant improvement there because my starting level and the level of potential is there, and it's going to get close to my limit. But once you get to that limit, potentially there's always the potential for something to be a little bit better, a little bit more. Not be much, but it's one of those things. Once your known level of capability gets there, there's always that little bit more. Now, kind of going on a bit of a tangent there, but we can always do a little bit more. The marginal gains that we get, though, the question is, what does that look like? Is that worth the effort? All those sorts of things. But I don't want to go down that because we need to keep on because of time. I want to say bring it all together is one of this last kind of principle I want to talk about. And this is the one where if you can nail this, it accelerates your pursuit of your potential. Okay, this is the one that not many people do. And so, we've talked about breaking it all down, but then what I want to do is think about bringing it all together. And so again, Stephen Furtick, he talks about, he says this: some people spend their whole life trying to figure out how to win rather than figuring out where they should win. And this is this one thing that I want to talk about is, where do you put your time, effort, and energy as you pursue your potential? Because it can really, it can magnify or it can dissipate your efforts. And so if we were to look here and we were to say, okay, cool, there's a whole lot of different areas of potential. So, I mean, we could look at, if just in the leadership space, we look at public speaking, we look at, decision making, we look at kind of the financial and business acumen piece, we look at building trust and rapport, we look at business negotiations, we look at understanding organizational change and change management. Like, there's a whole range of different things that you could be really good at. And the reality is that you can't be good at everything, right? And so what I want to talk about, if you think about, and you have kind of all these areas of potential, most people, what they will do, all right, is they'll be really good at some and not that great at others. Okay, and so this area of potential here and this area of potential here, this one here, they're kind of their strengths, right? But they're trying to do too much. And what ends up happening is their effort is spread then across 8 or 9 different areas of potential, and it's dissipated. The results then are going to be dissipated. And in reality, getting better at this one here is not necessarily making you better at this one, or this one. Okay. And so if you kind of, if you're kind of drawing a curve around this, it kind of looks really kind of ugly. And the space between here is what it is. But when it comes to your potential, what I want to challenge you to do is actually think about, how do I condense my efforts? How do I identify what we call competency companions? And what you essentially want is 3, maybe 4 areas of potential that you really focus on and that support each other. And, all these others, as you need, you kind of get better at them and that sort of thing, but that's not where you put your effort. You put your effort into 2 or 3, and they actually make you better at each. All right. And what ends up happening is that you get this, but the area in here is so much bigger. Now, for me, when it comes to my role and my leadership and all that sort of stuff, the thing where I focus on is coaching, speaking, and writing. They're the three capabilities for me that are going to make me a great leader in terms of my business right now. And they support each other. So when I am coaching, I get a whole lot of scenarios about which I can think and then write about. Okay. And so that's feeding in and developing my writing. Now, the more I write, the more articulate I am. So the easier I can communicate, the better speaker I become. And the more I'm writing, the more content I have to speak about. And the more that I speak, the more people see me, and the more people go, hey, I want to work with that guy. And so therefore, it creates opportunities for me to coach. And so you can see that those three areas of potential are supporting each other. They are, every gain that I make in the coaching one is going to increase my speaking and writing, and every just beyond increment that I improve in terms of my capability for my speaking and writing, they're going to give me more opportunity and make me a better coach, right? So my challenge to you here is, when you start thinking about where am I going to invest my time, energy, and effort in terms of pursuing my potential, and can I condense those? What are the ones that support each other? So that when I improve in one area, I automatically get improvements in another area. And that way, your potential just starts to exponentially move faster forward. There's a great book called The Extraordinary Leader by Zenger and Folkman. And this is one of the best pieces of kind of management leadership research. They had over 200,000 people and data points for 20,000 leaders. So it's a massive piece of research. And they talk about competency companions. And what came out in the research was that when leaders develop one particular competency, so often they get unintended but improvements in other competencies as well. And so, I mean, if you go extraordinaryleader.net, you can kind of search that and you can find out what some of those competency companions are. As I'm looking in here, some things like giving articulate feedback. If you can give feedback well, then what happens is you're able to build trust, relationship, and rapport, and therefore influence, right? It's one of those things. So rather than trying to go, I don't really know how to build the trust piece, well, go and get good at delivering feedback, right? One of those ones was communicating powerfully and prolifically was one of the ones that they talk about. And then that was, automatically people saw those leaders as more inspiring and motivating. Okay, so again, some of these kind of qualities that we want in order to, step into the next level and that sort of thing, they can be a bit, I guess, intangible, right? It's kind of like a quality type thing, being inspiring. How do I do that? Well, focus on being clear and articulate in your communication, and automatically when you try and be inspiring, because you're communicating clearly, it's going to increase the level of inspiration that you are able to generate. And so this kind of part here, where you are able to identify competency companions and really funnel your efforts into areas of potential that support each other, then that's what's going to accelerate your progression along your leadership journey. Does that make sense to people? I hope so. Give me a thumbs up if it does. And I'm really keen, as we start to kind of talk about, where to from here. I'm keen to know what stood out to you the most. What was the most valuable part in that little bit of a presentation? Put it in the chat. Okay. So just focusing on all those sorts of things. As I say, where to from here? I want to give you some extra resources. All right, it'll give you some extra resources that will help you on your journey. And so the first one of those is a paper that I've written around why creating coaching leaders is the way of the future. When you think about stepping into your potential, really for me, the highest level of potential that anyone can have from a leadership perspective is actually developing others and helping other people unlock their potential. And so really for me, coaching is one of the best mechanisms to do that. So I've got this particular paper that talks a little bit about that. And I'm also want to give you the first chapter of the Coaching Leader, my book. If those resources are something that you would like, then please just put yes, please in the chat and I will reach out. I'll send those to you. Okay. And in terms of the special offer for everyone here today, for those of you that are online, I'm going to make available for you a free half-an-hour coaching session with me, just to talk through some of the things and kind of get you to that next step. And really kind of if there's something that you is really stopping you from taking that next step into your potential and your leadership journey, I want to give you a little bit of time to kind of flesh out, at least identify what it is and what you can do in order to move forward. Okay. And so before we kind of close this up, I've got something that I want to share with you before I wrap it up fully, but I want to give you time to ask some questions. What questions do you have? Now, Eric's put in the chat, what does discipline equal? I assume that you're looking here. Discipline equals freedom is what that is. There's a book over on my shelf by a guy named Jocko Willink, who is an ex-Navy SEAL, now leadership consultant. And he's got this thing, discipline equals freedom. And basically what it's saying is if you are disciplined and you do all the incremental things and you actually pursue your potential in that thing, then what actually happens is you've got a whole freedom of choices at the end of that. And so the Navy SEALs, yes, they may be really strict on their standard operating procedures and what they do and how they do it, and everybody's the same. And that discipline means that once they're on the battlefield, they have the freedom to maneuver, and they can make choices like that because everybody knows what they're doing because of the disciplines being maintained. So that's kind of a bit parallel, Eric, but that's the concept there. Does anyone else have any questions? Alan, so any recommendations for how to status your capabilities? Yeah, so great question, Alan. Statusing, so really around prioritizing capabilities, I assume that you're asking there. And for me, there's multiple different ways that are going to do it. You know, what's your greatest return on investment? Where are you going to have the most impact? What's going to get you to the next level, I think is often a good question to ask. And so if you're breaking it down, as we spoke to, one about the different capabilities and things that you need to do, but also if you break down kind of the stages or milestones that you need to achieve in order to get to where you need to, what's going to get you to the next milestone? And as you go through to different milestones, there may be different capabilities that will be required to get to that next one. So you focus on the ones that are going to get you to the next level, and then reassess. And you go, okay, cool. What is it I need to develop and in order to go to that next level? And so the first part is articulating what the next level is. And then what are the capabilities you need to get there? And then say, okay, cool. This is where I'm going to focus. And realize what I was talking about, the competency companions, right? If you're focusing on certain areas that are all complementary, you're going to see benefits across your leadership capability. It's just if they're supporting each other, then you can really maximize that acceleration, as I mentioned. Cool. Well, hey, not seeing too many other questions coming through, so I want to leave you with this particular thought. And I wrote this down for you today. All right. And so, as and it's really returning back to this what if, right? The power of what if. I talk about the power of what if because it is so powerful. And so, there's a couple of thoughts that I want to leave you read around that. What if I told you that every obstacle is an opportunity in disguise? What if I told you that your dreams are really within your reach? What if I told you that the secret to happiness is actually embracing uncertainty? What if I told you that every setback is a set up for a comeback? What if I told you that the impossible is really just the untried? And what if I told you that your doubts are stepping stones in order to your dreams? What if I told you that you have the power to change the world and it simply lies within your actions? What if I told you that possibilities were endless and the only limits are the ones that you place on yourself? What if I told you that unlocking your potential lies within your hands? I hope that's been inspiring for you. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. And if you need anything, always reach out and join me on LinkedIn. I'm active on there. Would love to see you to connect. I'd love to hear on LinkedIn what stood out to you the most. But we're going to close this session out now. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. I will catch you later. See you later, guys.